Hello everybody and welcome to this $2,000 gaming PC build. And I know what you're thinking, it is definitely quite difficult to get hold of some of these components, so we're going to walk you through pretty much your best options, and of course we're going to take you through a full build from start to finish, as well as showing you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you know exactly what to expect and how it's going to perform. A massive thank you to Seagate for actually sponsoring this video. Let's get started. We want to maximise our gaming performance now and into the future, which is why we're going for a B550 motherboard, because it supports PCI Generation 4, which will allow us to use this super fast SSD, but then also because we can use an 8-core processor. What we're using here is a Ryzen 5800X. This is going to translate into super smooth gameplay, so regardless of whether you want to play Cyberpunk or maybe some Valorant and aim for, I don't know, hundreds of FPS, then the 5700X should be a brilliant choice. If you are a little bit unsure exactly which motherboard to go for and what all of the different features do, then don't worry, I've made a video explaining everything you need to know, and you can find that in the top right corner of your screen. Genuinely, one of the most exciting things about PC gaming in 2021 and 2022 is actually these things though, PCIe Generation 4 SSDs. This is pretty much one of the fastest ones you can buy. This is brand new from Seagate. This is the FireCuda 530. You can get it with and without a heatsink. This is the 2TB version, but you should be aware that we're pricing this build up for the 1TB one. The exact rated speed is going to vary a little bit depending on exactly which capacity that you go for, but all of them are stupidly fast, with this one being rated for 7,300 megabytes on the read and 6,900 on the write. That is insane. The block, or the heatsink on this, was actually made in partnership with EK. You get a 5-year limited warranty, 3 years of data recovery services, and some of the best read and write endurances in the game. I seem to have the shakes here today. Maybe that's because I had smoked salmon for lunch. Because my posh boy today even had chives in it. Installing this is as simple as ever. You just need to remove the screws on your heatsink or your M.2 slot if it doesn't have one. Then you can grab your SSD and just gently line that up with the slots. Grab the tiny M.2 screw that comes in your motherboard box and then secure this in place. Installing your processor is really straightforward, but it should be noted that the 5800X doesn't come with a cooler, which is why you're going to need something a bit more substantial. But let's not jump ahead here, just grab your motherboard and lift up this little lever. Remove your CPU from the pouch, being very careful not to actually damage any of these pins. Because I've used mine so many times before, it seems that we've got a load of thermal paste now leaking onto my hands, but this won't happen to you, don't worry. You just want to place it in so that the gold arrow actually lines up to the arrow that's on the motherboard, and then you can just rest it back in place by lowering the lever back down. And then going and washing your hands. You don't normally get the sound of me in the bathroom, but today you can enjoy it. The memory that we're using is from Crucial. This is a 3600 MHz kit, 2x8 for a total of 16. And as you'd expect for something called the Ballistics RGB, it looks great in your system with loads of pretty cool RGB lighting that you can customize in software. If you're a little bit confused as to what RAM speed actually is and the differences that it's going to make to you, the PC gamer, then you can find a video that I've made explaining all of this, you guessed it, in the top right corner of your screen. I sounded very London for a second there, didn't I? Top right hand corner. Oi, tell, where's my bottle of water? Installing this is just as simple as the other two components. There's only one right way of doing this. You want to open up slots number 2 and 4. You want to find this little groove in the middle, line it up with your stick of RAM, and then you just gently press this into place. It's definitely a lot easier if you put your motherboard down, but I'm trying to show you what I'm doing. Now, as we alluded to earlier, you are going to need some form of CPU cooler to actually keep, you guessed it, your CPU cool. And I will confess that today we are definitely going a little bit overkill with our cooling solution. This is the MAG Core Liquid 360R from MSI, and for a 360, I think this is actually pretty, not cheap, but it's pretty good. It's around about $110 at the moment, which is definitely still a lot of money. However, when you think you've got all of that RGB lighting, you've got something that makes your PC look a whole lot better, quieter, but then ultimately does the job of keeping your CPU cool, its value's not actually too bad. And speaking of value, we've gone for MSI's brand new case that they have also provided, and I'm going to start by also slightly upsetting MSI. I'm not sure about the looks of it. They have added all of the airflow ever. However, I think that the way they've gone about this on the front grille is not the most attractive thing in the world. It just looks a little bit cheap. I definitely think they could have added some sort of pattern or something. I mean, if you look at the Fantex case that I have over here, I'll just show some B-roll. You can definitely see that the styling is a little bit more pronounced. Exactly the same with a 4000 and 5000D from Corsair. They've done a very similar thing, but they've just made it look a little bit more grown up. On the contrary, however, the good thing here, does this not come off? It's just a bit stiff. Got there in the end. The good thing about this is that MSI cases typically offer fantastic value for money. I'm actually a big fan of them. I imagine as well that you can get two variants of this. One, like we have here, where you have the pretty bog standard fans on the front and then one RGB on the rear, and probably an upgraded version that has, well, the full shebang and RGB fans everywhere. Because to be honest, I don't really see the point of getting this, because you've got one RGB fan, but then the three on the front aren't. And surely the front is the bit that you want to look really good. However, the case does make up for this with two proper USB ports and then a Type-C. Before we put our motherboard in the case, I would strongly advise that whatever cooler you get, you either install it now or check whether there's any mounting hardware that can be installed now. Because take it from me, if you don't do this and you find that there's something really fiddly that you then have to do in the case, it makes it like 10 times harder. It appears that if you are using a Ryzen CPU, you don't need to change the mounts. Hooray! If you're wondering, by the way, what's in the box? What's in the box? It's not what you might think. It is actually a vertical GPU mount, but you still need to buy the riser if you are going to swap this out. Pick up your case and lay it down flat on your table. Grab your motherboard and then just drop this in to the very big hole at the back. Grab your screws out of the hard drive cage and separate them. Fix it down into place. Feel free to sing a little song to help the time fly by. This has definitely got a fair old bit of heft to it actually, and we've not really got anything in it yet, which is usually a sign of good construction, but obviously you've got so many perforated holes everywhere, it almost doesn't look it. Let's pop the top of the case. Once you've removed the dust filter, you'll find these very glossy black fans that are probably okay, they're adequate, but we don't want an adequate PC build for $2,000, which is why we have included some extras in our budget. And these are genuinely one of my favorite fans, just because they're a lot better than they have any right to be. These are RGB and they are practically silent once you've tuned them. So let's remove the stock fans. It's definitely worth noting that if you wanted to, you can also mount extra fans here as well. So if you're gonna put like a radiator or something in here and do a custom loop, then this would actually be very appropriate. Inside the box, you do actually get a fan control hub if you don't have enough headers on your motherboard. You've got an old-fashioned clicker if you don't have any RGB headers on your motherboard. And then finally, and slightly annoyingly, you do have a fan control hub that converts digital RGB into addressable RGB. So grab that RGB cable and plug it into the hub that is already pre-routed for you. Then you can connect the hub itself to this addressable RGB on the right of the motherboard. Now it's time to connect the fans to the fan headers, and they're scattered all around the motherboard. You have these little 3 and 4 pins that just connect to where it says CHFAN, which stands for chassis fan. There are two things that do annoy me about these fans though. Firstly, you have to have the text upside down in order to have the cables facing the right direction, which is a right pain, but then also the cables themselves are just a bit too short because they expect you to use that hub. As always, when you turn your case around, you'll find this big bundle of cables, and all of these will need to connect to the motherboard. Your big USB 3 goes right here at the top, just under this very large power connection. Underneath that goes your USB Type-C. HD audio goes here at the bottom left of the motherboard. And then finally, you have these tiny weeny little cables that say reset, power, power LED. These go in this little block right down here at the bottom right. I'd highly advise that you check your motherboard manual as they tell you exactly which one is which. It seems like we got this out a while ago, but it is now finally time to actually install our CPU cooler. And this is definitely a little bit more of an unusual design because as you can see, it does appear as if the pump is actually in the radiator block itself, which is definitely quite unusual. This is where the cable is. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how that affects performance, but the first thing we need to do is actually attach the fans. MSI losing points for just bundling everything together in one bag, so you don't know what's what. Then comes the quite fiddly bit actually. If there wasn't any fans there at the front, this would have made it a bit easier. You can see that there's really not going to be much room there at the top at all, so actually I think it's going to be better to install the power supply now. The power supply is never the most exciting component, and I guess today's not really particularly different. This is the Pure Power 11 FM. It's from Be Quiet, so as the name suggests, it's going to run very cool and quiet in its operation. FM doesn't stand for frequency modulation, oh no, it stands for fully modular, as you can see, you only need to use the cables you actually need to use. And because you might actually have some budget to spare, I've actually grabbed these PCIe power cables from Be Quiet just to make the whole system look a little bit more fancy. Connect the cables to the power supply itself, and then usually you'd grab your power supply and you would fit it with the fan facing downwards. However, in this case, and with this power supply, because we have this pretty awful label on it and a big gaping hole in the case, I'm actually going to break the rules here by having the fan facing upwards so that this bit actually looks nice. Screw your power supply down to the case, grab the CPU power cable, then connect this up to the top of the motherboard. You can then feed this very big ATX power connection through. If you're using any 2.5-inch devices or you've got some SATA connections for RGB like we do here, then you can hook these up now as well. And then as for these PCIe cables, these are going to be used for the graphics card when we fit that last, but it is actually worth feeding these through now, just down here at the bottom. Let's finally see if we can actually fit this CPU cooler in though. Maybe manage this cable first. And grab the little fan adapter for the fans on the radiator and plug this in and feed this through also. Honestly, I hate radiators because they just take so long to fit. They look so good and they're great for performance, but they're just a right faff. As this is a triple radiator, you've got 12 screws to fit, and because they haven't organized them neatly, it just takes far too long. You grab this cooler bracket and then you just slide it into place. Grab these little L-shaped AMD retention arms, drop them on the floor, then poke them through and screw on gently. Add a small pea-sized amount of thermal paste to the CPU. Then you can grab your pump head, lay it over the catch, do the same with the bottom one, and then just screw it into place. Don't forget to plug in your all-important RGB though, as your PC just wouldn't be the same without it. Now comes the absolute joyous bit of actually fitting our RTX 3070. I'm incredibly excited about this one because I've never actually used this exact GPU before. This is the 3070 amp Hollow Black from Zotac. It's a big boy, it is definitely pretty thick. I think it's gonna fit the aesthetic pretty well, but if you're after something that not only has brilliant performance but also looks pretty good, then this could be just the ticket. The only thing that concerns me a little bit is the fact that while they are pretty big, this does only have 2 fans. Grab your screwdriver and remove slots 2 and 3, and then joyously line it up with the slot, and then give it a good push until it clicks into place. Don't forget to actually fit this back down with those screws that you've just removed. Grab your neatened cables and then just gently press them in to the sockets at the top. Pull the cables through so that everything is nice and neat. And then there, I think we have, hopefully, our completed system. I think the theming has actually worked really well here. This is clearly a very good looking system. I love how you've got so many black elements, but then you've got a bit of visual interest with this hollow bar down the bottom. You will definitely be left with a fair few cables to tidy up around the back. This is unfortunately pretty standard once you get going with RGB fans, but I don't think it's going to be a big deal. Shall we get this thing powered up and see if it works? Yes, please. The moment of truth. The power button. Whoa, that's very red. Okay, that is very red, and I do love the look of the GPU. I can see why it would appeal. Hold on. Yes! Something that is really important to note is that if you are buying this motherboard and you find that you can't get to this stage, something isn't quite working, you've got a red light, then the problem will probably be that you do need to update the BIOS. There is actually a button on the back of this. It's really easy to do. I've made a video all about this in the top right corner of your screen. You just need to use the USB BIOS flashback utility to get it started. Now that the hard bit is over, we can bask in the appearance of this thing. It is a lot of RGB on offer. If you don't want that, then this is probably not the system for you. But because you've got this like RGB vein down the side, it sort of matches up with everything else. Right, give me a couple of hours to install Windows, get some games on this, and I'll be right back. Here we are then, all set up and ready to go. And something straight out the gate is that I'm actually now testing the speed of this SSD, and it is genuinely the fastest one I've ever used. But enough talk, let's jump into some games. We will start with some Destiny 2. This is right at the beginning of the game when we're currently getting around about 70 FPS, which doesn't actually sound that impressive until you remember that this is running at absolute max settings at 4K. If you're playing on something like a TV or maybe you've got a 60Hz monitor, then this is definitely a very cool tool in your arsenal. If it were up to me though, and of course it is, then I would play this at 1440p because this is where you're going to get that sweet spot between resolution and refresh rate. And you can see we've jumped up quite a lot already. It's not quite double, but it's really not that far off actually, at around about 150 FPS. Obviously this is going to vary depending on where you are in the game. This is a little bit more of a closed off environment at the moment, but realistically if you're rocking a 144Hz monitor, then this is going to get you the most out of it. Quickly, before we move on to our final title, I will show you the differences at 1080p. This is definitely the smoothest by far, so if you want to be as competitive as possible, then this is definitely how you're going to want to play. To be fair, Destiny 2 is a little bit of an older title, so how about something that's a bit more up to date? Some Cyberpunk 2077. What you're seeing here is absolute max settings at 4K with ray tracing set to ultra. The only caveat they need to be aware of is that we are using DLSS, so we're rendering at a lower resolution. And because I've set this to 4K, I have changed the DLSS to be performance mode. So this means that it doesn't look quite as good as it would if you were rendering at normal 4K resolution. But it is quite surprising actually, because even compared to 1440p, this is noticeably sharper. To be fair, the 3070 is definitely aimed more towards 1440p gaming. So we've changed the resolution to 1440p and we've set DLSS to the balance mode. And here you can see this is definitely a lot more playable. I think I played this game at around about 60 FPS. I think it's definitely a great trade-off. This does not look as good as that performance mode at 4K, but otherwise I think it's an absolutely cracking experience. This is proper RTX on. And speaking of RTX, there is actually a way to get your cake and eat it with a racing game. One of my personal favourites, F1 2021. Is he going to get a great start? No, not really. We're here in the wet at the Sochi this is using Nvidia DLSS, and to be honest with you, in certain conditions I find that it's not actually the best use of the technology, because sometimes you get some weird sort of artifacts, but I think it just needs a little bit of tuning, so this will get better in future updates. But this is a game that looks absolutely fantastic. I mean, 4K, ray tracing, DLSS, what's not to love? Well, maybe my driving ability. But let's press on to almost certainly your favourite title, some Call of Duty Warzone. While we're waiting, by the way, we can do a little sound test. And if I'm honest, it's not the quietest system in the world. Yes, you can tune this, but I do think that that GPU with its 2 fans is definitely a bit louder than it could be if you went for something with 3. But here we are in Warzone, jumping out of the plane, absolute max settings at 4K, but with some DLSS enabled. And right out of the gate, this is allowing us to get some very high frame rates indeed. You can really see a big difference versus something like Destiny, where we're getting around about 75, 80 frames a second, whereas in Warzone, which is a more modern game, you're getting a higher frame rate, all thanks to that DLSS. Oh, why am I so bad? We've changed it down to 1440p because let's be honest, we were never going to get there otherwise. But yeah, long story short, DLSS set to quality, 1440p, you're probably looking around about 120 to 150 FPS depending on where you are. But all in all, you're going to get a brilliant experience with Warzone on this. And as you can see, I am a Gulag winner. Let me know your thoughts on this system. What do you guys like? What do you dislike? But absolutely smash that like button if you've enjoyed it. Get yourself subscribed. And as always, if you want to check out current pricing on any of the parts featured, you can find them linked in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.